Delighted to be joined now by the former Australian High Commissioner, Alexander Downer. Now, Alexander, when you were last on the show back in March, I'm going to play what you said because you warned that the Tories could be facing this Canada-style wipeout. You said it in relation to this idea of actually changing leaders at that point, but let's just have a little listen to what you said.
I think this will lead to a kind of 1993 Canadian election result where the Canadian Tories ended up with just 2 seats.
Seriously? That was on the back of a paper review where we were talking about whether Penny Mordaunt should be installed like a set of double glazing into Downing Street because Rishi Sunak's poll rating was tanking. What do you now think? Because, I mean, the latest Survation poll suggesting they might be reduced to 72 seats is catastrophic.
Well, I think the campaign, which is a statement of the obvious, is going very badly. But the reason I think it's going so badly is that the Conservatives are continually talking about themselves and talking about the right of politics and attacking reform and so on. Instead, if they wanted to have any chance, to use an expression we like to use, of saving the furniture, they need to focus on the Labor Party. Because it looks inevitable that the Labor Party is going to be the next government. That's what matters. And what is that government going to be like? Are we going... The Labor Party's made it clear it's going to re-empower trade union bosses. So we're back to the Britain of the 1970s, the winter of discontent and all of that. They are planning to increase taxation in a whole lot of different areas. They have massive spending programs. So the government is going to control more and more of the economy. Productivity will continue to, at best, flatline, probably decline, as it has done in Australia under Australian Labor. And it seems to me there is a huge array of material the Conservatives could be running against Labor. But the more they talk about Farage, they talk about themselves, they talk about their policies. They've been in power for 14 years.
They keep on talking about this whole, well, we were hit with a global pandemic and we were hit with the war in Ukraine and it's all been very difficult and we're now having to reverse taxes that we put up. We're now having to reverse immigration that we put up. The public's stopped listening, haven't they? I mean, you've been around the block for a long time.
They might be fair arguments, those arguments, but the public is looking to the future. And so I would help them look to the future. I would say to them, this is the future. The polls show Labor is going to win in a landslide. It's going to have a supermajority, and this is what they'll do. And if I were running the Conservative campaign, not to put too fine a point on it, I would paint the dystopian future of Britain under Labor. They have a weak leader. They have a huge number of left-wing MPs. There is quote after quote after quote of Labor MPs over the last 5 years that the Conservatives could use to get the public to think again about voting Labor. But if they keep talking about themselves and different policies they're going to pursue and how terrible they think Nigel Farage is, they will end up with a Canadian-style result.
Well, you're saying about advising the Conservatives. You'd be well placed to do that because you ran the Liberal Party in Australia, which is the equivalent of the Conservatives. You've had experience of both winning and losing. At this stage in the game, you've got a public that isn't really listening. You've got this degree, perhaps, of complacency about Labor just walking in to have that supermajority on the basis of a very low vote share. So I get what you're saying about sort of switching the narrative and making it more about attacking Labor. Why, in your mind, do you think they're not doing that? Is it because Rishi Sunak wants to have some sort of clean fight and not use attack? I mean, how effective is attack? We're in last chance saloon, so there's no other way to pivot, is there?
No, I mean, what is not going to be effective is continually announcing new policies, because they've been in power for 14 years. So the public are going to say, fair enough, but why didn't you do that over the last 14 years? There may be good answers to that question, but that's not the discussion you need to get into. You only want to have one discussion at this stage in the election campaign. I mean, and that's about the opposition becoming the government. I've been in tough elections. I've seen, for example, the 1993 Australian election where Paul Keating turned it around from a big deficit by just focusing on the opposition and defeated the opposition. It is the only way for a long-serving government. OK, so we're flawed is the implication. You wouldn't say that, but is the implication.
Yeah.
And all governments are flawed. But this is what will happen if Labor wins. And if they talk of nothing else but that and be strident and determined in that message, then, well, they'll save the furniture. If they keep talking about themselves and Nigel Farage and so on, they will end up with a Canadian-style result.
Really? Is there still time to save the furniture? I mean, you've talked about it being a disastrous campaign. Just how bad has it been? I mean, given an evaluation of the D-Day debacle, for instance.
Well, I mean, that it speaks for itself. You can't do that sort of thing during an election campaign. You have to focus on doing the right thing by the D-Day veterans. That's the priority for that day, was the 6th of June. So on the 6th of June, that should have just been penciled in as no matter what else happens this day, that is what we're going to do on that day. So for a week, there was discussion about D-Day. For a week. And that's a week out of the campaign. That's a week. Of course, they will know that, the Conservatives. But that is a week.
And they're running out of time.
Exactly. They should have been talking about Labor. Now, they've got 3 weeks to go.
Have they got time
to
squeeze these polls down, Alexander?
Yes, I think they have.
Really?
I mean, I think in 3 weeks, if they vigorously and determinedly focus on the Labor Party, its labour market reforms, its tax policies, its diversity, equity and inclusion policies and so on, if they keep focusing on the horror story of what a Labor government would be like under a weak leader with a lot of left-wing MPs, and the country will become virtually a one-party state at this rate, if they keep focusing on that, then people will start to go back to the Conservatives.
And what do you think, as a Conservative and an international former statesman, let's put it like that, because you were leader of the opposition in Australia, what do you think about this idea of, in the UK, conservatism being consigned to the sidelines for potentially decades to come? I mean, it's not a comfortable position for anyone on the right to be in, is it?
It needn't be for more than a few years.
Really?
How
do you mount an effective opposition to a supermajority that could surpass anything in Tony Blair's wildest dreams?
Focus on what they're doing. Don't focus on yourself.
Yeah.
Focus on the decisions they make, and you'll start winning the public back. The public will start to think, these people aren't so good after all. I mean, I don't think the public, by the way, at this stage, do think the Labor Party is going to be a great government. They just want to get rid of the Tories. But if you tell the public that the price of getting rid of the Tories is what I have described, union bosses back in charge at number 10, massive increases in all sorts of anti-business taxes, a re-regulation of the economy, winding back all that Thatcher and Blair did over the past decades, winding it all back to Wilson and Callaghan. If you can convince the public of that, then you will start winning votes back and win quite a lot of votes back.
What do you make of this talk by Nigel Farage about him being the one to unite the right after the election, rising like a phoenix from the flames, from the ashes of the Conservative Party? Do you buy that?
No, I don't, because I'm sorry to say this is an example of hubris. The thing about people in politics is when they're doing well, they almost always overreach.
Yes.
And to say that, they almost always do. Napoleon did.
Yes.
They almost always overreach, and I think he's overreaching saying things like that because the public aren't thinking that. It sounds slightly silly and tinny to be saying that. I'm the leader of the opposition suddenly. I mean, they won no seats at the last election. They have one seat by virtue of Lee Rowley leaving the Conservative Party. Lee Anderson.
Yeah.
Sorry, Lee
That's
Anderson, leaving the Conservative Party. that's it, right?
Yes.
So to claim to be on that basis and on the basis of one opinion poll the leader of the opposition, it just sounds silly. So no, just
Who would
ignore
be
it.
best in your mind? Because you're now chair of the Policy Exchange, which is a leading think tank in Westminster, so you're up close and personal quite a lot with a lot of ministers and shadow ministers. On the Tory side, once this is all done and dusted, assuming that it is a terrible drubbing, because that's what the pollsters are all more or less universally saying it will be, who do you think would be best placed to try and piece things back together on the right?
It's hard to know because it depends who wins their seats. I mean, you have to find somebody who's won a seat.
OK, so let's put it this way. Let's assume that Braverman, Patel, Mordaunt, Jenrick and I'm trying to think who else might be Badenoch, sorry.
Badenoch, yeah.
Imagine they're all in position and they do manage to retain their seats. Which of those would you most fancy to try and mount an effective opposition to as Labour supermajority?
I think I'd have to wait and see before I made a decision like that, and I don't have to make the decision, but before I was sure. You need, I mean, it's an awful expression, but you need an attack dog.
Yes.
You need somebody who would be, not somebody grand, and too grand to say anything rude about the Labour Party.
No one too professorial. You need somebody who can take the gloves off.
Right. You absolutely do. Which of those people? I'm not quite sure which of them.
How about Penny Mordaunt? I mean, I say her because there's a Sunday Express poll today.
She's been quite good in the House of Commons in
and she's been taking part in these debates, albeit with a very impressive blow dry. And she's been taking the fight to Labour. She was the one who said at the Tory party conference last year, stand up and fight. But what do you think?
Well,
she's got recognition because of the coronation.
She's got. Yes, that won't carry for long in opposition. But she might have plenty of fight. I think she does show she has plenty of fight.
Might be effective to have a woman as well, just to keep on reminding Labour about their lack of female leadership.
It doesn't matter whether it's a man or a woman. It matters whether the person is effective. Some women are brilliant leaders and some are hopeless, and the same with men. So it's not about men and women.
But get somebody tough, I think, is the conclusion here, Alexander. Alexander Downer, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Great to speak to you.